I'm John Coons. Texas Coast Migration Tours have been a stalwart of Field Guide's North American schedule since the beginning, and I've been fortunate enough to guide these trips for over 30 years. Seeing birds in migration is one of my favorite aspects of birding, and I love doing these trips and sharing the excitement of spring migration with others. This year's Texas Coast Migration Tours were the first ones Field Guides had operated in more than a year, as the pandemic put a sudden stop to travel. All of our group was fully vaccinated, and we were careful to wear masks where needed or required. And it was great to be back in the field again, having a bunch of great sightings of wonderful birds. It was a special treat to be joined on the first tour by Bret Whitney, my longtime friend and Field Guides colleague. Bret and I had come down to the Texas coast a few days early to check on logistics and make sure all the birding venues were accessible. To give you an idea of how our first tour in more than a year unfolded, Bret and I have put together this episode of OutBirding with Field Guides. This tour centers on the upper Texas coast region where most of the migration action happens. But we begin with a couple of days birding north and east of Houston for red-cockaded woodpeckers at W.G. Jones State Forest and near the small town of Silsbee for breeding warblers and other resident species of the Big Thicket before settling into the town of Winnie for the rest of the tour. The Longleaf Pine woods, preserved in Jones State Forest, harbors a few family groups of red-cockaded woodpeckers here at the southwestern edge of the species range. Red-cockaded woodpeckers are unusual in that they choose to make nest cavities in living trees that are affected by red heart fungus, and they drill resin wells around the nest cavity, which are thought to reduce the incidence of depredation by black rat snakes. The woodpeckers look for food by flaking bark, and with their constant activity over the years, it's amazing that there's any bark left on some of those pines. Several pairs of pine warblers were breeding in the area. This Carolina wren survived the severe winter weather that hit most of Texas back in mid-February, but numbers were lower than usual this spring. Our next destination was deeper into East Texas in the Silsbee-Kuntz area, where we hoped to find a number of warblers and other birds on breeding territories in the mixed pine and hardwood forests of the Big Thicket. One of our first Big Thicket sightings was Charlie Bigfoot. We were fortunate to get great views of this worm-eating warbler singing on territory. And with a little patience, we also managed to get everyone on this singing Swainson's warbler. Kentucky warbler numbers have declined noticeably over the past 20 years, and we only heard a couple of birds this trip. Yellow-throated warblers had arrived on breeding territories as well. And prairie warbler on territory in mixed conifer and hardwood shrubbery put on an excellent show for us. This male delivered consecutive A and B song types. Acadian flycatchers had only recently moved into breeding territories in the Big Thicket, where it is the only nesting impidinax. High Island is the most renowned birding destination on the upper Texas coast and known worldwide as a migration mecca. We spent quite a bit of time there over several days. In the Houston Audubon Society sanctuary known as Smith Oaks, the wonderful new Catherine G. McGovern Canopy Walkway is not only great for seeing into the treetops and down into the marshes, but it also provides access to a very impressive rookery of breeding egrets, herons, spoonbills, and cormorants. Many great egrets had paired up and established nest sites, just a bill jab away from their neighbors. Others were still in the nest building stage. It was wonderful to see and compare the bright colors of the facial skin of the great and snowy egrets. The birds display these remarkable colors for only a few weeks during the courtship and early nesting season. The roseate spoonbills were also in high breeding colors. While some were already on eggs, many other pairs were engaged in their bizarre, bill-clattering courtship rituals and pair bonding. Smaller numbers of tricolored herons were performing courtship behaviors as well, showing off their amazingly bright blue facial skin. Some of the many neotropic cormorants were up in trees, holding on with their big webbed feet as they broke off twigs for nest construction. These neighboring pairs were attempting to use the same long branch. Located about 20 minutes from High Island, Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge, with its vast freshwater and brackish marshes, is a haven for birds and other wildlife not to be missed. On this tour, both king and clapper rails performed remarkably well for us, and we had good luck with spotting American and least bitterns in the reeds. As we often see, there were thousands of swallows of several species on the move over the many miles of marshland, and we also saw a few flocks of fulvous whistling ducks at Anahuac. Local breeders such as boat-tail grackle and seaside sparrow were also common. A few migrant landbirds were present along the roads in the refuge, including orchard orioles and eastern kingbirds. But the highlight at Anahuac for all of us was getting to study both king and clapper rails only a few minutes apart.
What a beautiful bird.
Here we can appreciate the king rail's rather uniformly rusty face and underparts with minimal dark spotting on the sides of the neck. Clapper rail has a distinctively grayish face, contrasting with the duller rusty neck, and the breast shows a more extensive dusky wash.
This is such a wonderful comparison with the king.
It is.
We enjoyed a nice picnic lunch near the refuge headquarters. We shared the pavilion with some nest-building barn swallows, which were gathering mud and grass from the edges of the small freshwater pond there. Rollover Pass is the narrowest neck of land on the Bolivar Peninsula. The inland, bay side of the pass is a resting spot for lots of gulls, terns, and black skimmers, and often has several shorebirds as well. A few of the many sandwich terns were showing the delicate, rosy blush of breeding plumage on their underparts. This winter-plumaged lesser blackback gull was one of the few we have ever had on our Texas coast migration tours. It will be interesting to see if it becomes more regular in the future. All of the many black-bellied plovers we saw were still largely in their winter dress, but a few of the ruddy turnstones had already advanced to full breeding plumage. There were lots of black skimmers around Rollover Pass and everywhere else along the Bolivar Peninsula. Our walks to look for migrant landbirds along the boardwalks and other paths at High Island were quite successful. This beautiful male golden-winged warbler was tempted to take a bath at one of the drips at Smith Oaks. The first push of indigo bunnings happened during the course of the tour. We had numerous fine studies of eastern wood pewees.
That's another eastern wood pewee?
Yeah, eastern wood pewee.
There were lots of summer tanagers, but we saw only a few scarlets. Thrushes were very good this tour. Swainson's was the most common, and we got to hear a few whisper songs from them. A single hermit thrush was late, as almost all the winter individuals had moved north by early April. It was a treat to have excellent views of a couple of gray-cheeked thrushes. And we saw at least a few wood thrushes each day. But this was the only vary for the tour. Northern water thrush was cooperative, as usual at High Island. And we managed to spot a handful of ovenbirds in the understory as well. This was a very good tour for seeing hooded warblers and also black and white warblers, with multiple individuals spotted most days in the woods. While black-throated green warblers were just starting to appear. The Bolivar Peninsula offers a very different but equally exciting perspective on migration, with beaches and mudflats that attract thousands of shorebirds headed north to their breeding grounds in the subarctic and Arctic regions of Canada and Alaska. But a shift to a strong northeasterly wind overnight caused us to change our plans to bird the Bolivar Peninsula that morning. We might even shut the road down for the highway crews to come in and clean this up too, so we could get stuck down there with those guys. How you doing there? Is the road open all the way? Yeah. Okay. Just on your side. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Big winds out there, pushing water up over the road here. Lots of debris. Yeah.
On him to turn around. Come on, turn around.
Yeah, we're going to make a good decision here and not continue out the peninsula. There's water and debris. The Gulf of Mexico is coming across the highway here. The only happy things out here right now are the pelicans.
Yeah, it's open, yeah. Plan B turned out to be just the right decision as we headed back inland to bird the pastures and rice fields south of Winnie. This restless flock of about 300 buff-breasted sandpipers with a smaller number of golden plovers was absolutely thrilling to see. There weren't too many flooded rice fields around, but we enjoyed seeing some white ibis, black-bellied whistling ducks, black-necked stilts, and lots of other shorebirds, including quite a few whimbrels. Sabine Woods, owned and maintained by the Texas Ornithological Society, is a 30-acre coastal oak motte south of Port Arthur, just across the Sabine River from Louisiana. Less than a mile from the shore of the Gulf of Mexico, Sabine Woods is highly isolated and serves as an important refuge for hungry migrant songbirds that have just completed their crossing of the Gulf. Some of our best sightings of warblers and other migrants were made along the excellent trail system in Sabine Woods.
There's step up here. Are there two?
I think so.
There's two birds. I don't know what the other one is. Okay, here's the. Step over here, Robin.
It was great to pick up a couple of male cerulean warblers at Sabine, and another yellow-throated warbler provided a nice close look. Yellow-billed cuckoos were starting to move through the region during the tour. We saw several rose-breasted grosbeaks, but not as many as we would have expected. Hooded warblers continued to show well right through the end of the tour. We saw at least 3 golden-winged warblers on the tour, as well as several blue-wings. Quite unexpected was this male Audubon's yellow-rumped warbler, which revealed its bright yellow throat before darting out of view. It was also unusual to see a couple of different yellow-bellied sapsuckers this late in the spring. After the coast road down the Bolivar Peninsula had been cleared of debris, we enjoyed a fine morning of shorebirding on famous Bolivar Flats. This year was especially good for American avocets. There were literally thousands of avocets in the Bolivar area, almost all of them in high breeding plumage. We saw only a couple of reddish egrets, but this immature bird was performing its dancing, foraging behavior in a brackish pool. Willets were a constant, usually noisy presence, as were the hundreds of laughing gulls. Least terns were also numerous at Bolivar, where they would soon be nesting. Also present in the thousands were sanderlings and dunlins. Almost all of the sanderlings were in winter plumage. Most sanderlings attain full breeding plumage only as they approach the high Arctic breeding ground. Many dunlin were showing signs of rich breeding plumage, but this one was still in full winter dress as it successfully extracted a writhing polychaete worm from the mud at Bolivar. There is a nice variety of shorebirds coming in to forage at this freshwater puddle. How many species of peeps, or genus Calidris sandpipers, can you identify in this and the next clip? The answer will be revealed at the end of the episode. A single Baird sandpiper was out of place on the sandy flats of Bolivar. Here you can appreciate the long wings extending well past the tail tip. There were just a few knots around, all of them still pretty much in winter plumage. Bolivar Flats is a great place to study the 4 species of small banded plovers. Wilson's, with its heavy all-black bill, is the largest of the 4 and is usually found singly or in pairs in the drier, sandier areas well above the surf line. The breast band is complete and the legs are dull pinkish. The male usually shows some rusty in the hind collar area, and in relation to the female's pattern, the breastband, lores, and forecrown are more contrastingly black. Semi-palmated plover is almost always the most numerous species around Bolivar. It is colored most like Wilson's, but it is much smaller with a proportionally much shorter, thinner bill that always shows at least a hint of orange or yellow at the base. Piping plover is most closely related to semi-palmated and is structured very similarly. However, piping is always much paler through the head and upper parts, which contrast more strongly with the black breastband and forehead. Piping also lacks the dark mask characteristic of semi-palmated, which makes the eye stand out clearly on the face, and the base of the bill and legs are also more distinctly yellow-orange. Snowy plover is the least numerous of the small banded plovers at Bolivar in April. It shares the pale upper parts with piping, but the similarity ends there, as Snowy has a proportionally longer, thinner, all-black bill, and the breastband is broken or incomplete. Snowy's legs are never brightly colored, usually rather dull grayish. Our final birding forays were on the return drive to Houston, where a stop near Lake Charlotte produced nice views of a pileated woodpecker. We'll now close with a couple of minutes of birds in flight from the Bolivar Peninsula. Thanks for joining us on this episode of OutBirding with Field Guides. We look forward to seeing you in the field soon.